Video with Mr. Taylor. This time we're talking about the tenses of verbs, and it's going to get a little bit complicated. There's a lot of new terminology, so this is one where I might recommend you pause every now and then, maybe even take notes as you go, because there are some difficult terms that we're talking about here that can be kind of tricky to keep track of. When we're talking about verb tense, it's almost, but not quite, like a time machine, so grab your DeLoreans because here we go. When it comes to verb tenses, the first two major things that we have to talk about will be the time, past or present. And then we're also going to talk about simple, continuous, and perfect tenses and how those each relate back to either being in the past or in the present. Now, time tricks. This does get tricky because here's the deal. This sentence here, I have been teaching at Campbell for 5 years, is considered in the present, even though everything that happens in that sentence really took place in the past. You just got to look at the first verb, in this case, have. And have is in the present tense, so that's going to tell me that even though I'm talking about something in the past within the sentence, the actual tense, which is different than the time, is the present tense. So be careful on that one. That can be tricky, and it trips me up all the time, and I always have to double check myself on that one. So watch out for that time trick. But let's get back into the simple tenses. We have simple present and we have simple past. Now, you might already be pretty familiar with these. Skylar picks roses for Jessica. Because this is in the third person, it ends with an S. If it were in a different person, it wouldn't need the S necessarily. But we can tell that this is happening right now. We call this the simple present. Simple past, we have Skylar picked the roses for Jessica. Now in the past tense, and when verbs move towards the past, they do get a little bit tricky because a lot of verbs don't like to follow the rules. We call those the irregular verbs. But for the most part, our verbs in the simple past will end with ed. All right, simple tenses. Notice no helping verbs were needed until we start getting into the other tenses that go along with past and present. So let's start with continuous. The continuous tense is also called the progressive tense, so you'll hear those two terms interchanged. But here is the formula. You're going to have be, or another form of it, which could be is, am, are, was, were, been, being. And then you're going to have your verb, and it's going to end with ing. Now, fortunately, even though this rarely happens, we do get a solid rule here. All verbs in the progressive or continuous tense will always end with ing. Here are a couple examples. Stephanie is cooking with spaghetti. Stephanie was cooking with spaghetti. Notice neither one of those has be as the helping verb there, but they're different forms of that verb. And then I took the verb cook and I added eng to the end, just like I said I would. Let's take a look at a couple more examples. For the present continuous, we have Skylar is picking roses for Jessica. So we have is. We notice the first verb is what gives us our past or present tense, and in this case, it is present. If we switch that one to past, then we would have Skylar was picking roses for Jessica. Was tells us that we are now in the past because it's the first helping verb, and it is past continuous because we have the form of be, and our new verb now ends with ing. We're going to move into, just a further detail. Verb plus ing. We have a different part to the verb, and we call this the participle. In this case, it is the present participle. A present participle takes your verb, and it will always end in ing. And this is the type of participle that you use for the continuous tense. Participles, we'll talk about in another video, can be used outside of just being the normal verb. So make sure you check out that video coming up hopefully pretty soon. But for now, we're talking about how this is used as the actual verb in your sentence. And in this case, it will be in the continuous tense. Next, the perfect tenses. My memory key that always clues me in is I think of this. Have plus en looks like heaven, and heaven is considered perfect. So I'm going to take a form of the verb have, which could be have, has, or had, and then I'm going to have a verb plus en, or it can have another ending. This is where those irregular verbs do like to break all the rules. Okay, most verbs actually in this case would end with ed, but there are a lot of verbs that would normally end in ed as a simple past, but break that rule and actually have something different when they're in the perfect tense. And they usually have en, but there are a few other options, and I'll show you a couple examples of those. For my example sentences for the perfect tense, though, we have Andy has broken his arm and Andy had broken his arm. In both of these cases, we have has and had, which are different forms of have, and they do actually happen to end with the en ending after the main verb. So here are a few more examples. These first 3 examples will be in the present perfect. We can tell they're in the present because we have the verb has as the first helping verb, and it establishes this is in the present. Even though all these things took place in the past, has is a present tense verb, so we call this the present perfect. Skylar has picked roses for Jessica. Skylar has taken pictures of Jessica. Skylar has burst into laughter. Our first example, picked, is one of the main verbs that always ends with ed when you change it to past or past perfect. But then we have taken, which follows the rule that I illustrated, where some of them, in this case, taken and past tense would be took, but this will end with the en ending when we change this to our perfect tense. And in our last option, Skylar has burst into laughter. Burst is actually one of the really strange verbs that does not change when we move from present tense to past tense to the perfect tense. And now let's take a look at a couple of examples of past perfect. Notice all of these have had as our first helping verb. That tells us it's in the past. And the combination of had plus the ending of the verb tells us that we are in the perfect tense as well. So for the past perfect examples, Skylar had picked roses for Jessica, Skylar had taken pictures of Jessica, and Skylar had burst into laughter. This new participle is called the past participle. No matter when in time it's actually taking place, we still call this particular form of the verb the past participle. The verb plus en, and notice in parentheses, or other ending, because verbs love to break the rules. And these are used for the perfect tense, or they could be used on their own as a participle, somewhere else in the sentence, not even acting like a verb. But once again, more on that later. All right, it's been complicated so far, but wait, there's more. We are actually going to throw all of this in together and come up with the perfect continuous tense. We are combining both of those tenses, and it can either be in the past or the present. We will have plus a form of is, and if we have already, we know that the en ending is going to turn the be verb into been, and then we're going to have a verb plus the ing ending. So in our examples, Sam has been walking the dog, and Sam had been walking the dog. When we use the perfect, we take has and we put the en ending on the verb that's the form of to be. In this case, it will always turn into been. And then we're going to have our verb plus the ing ending that comes from our continuous tense, and that's how we get been, verb plus the ing on the end. All right, for our present perfect continuous, this is in the present tense because our first helping verb is in the present tense. Skylar has been picking roses for Jessica. Has tells us that it is in the present tense. It also tells us that because we have the has plus the en ending that we are talking about the perfect tense, and then because we have that form of to be and the ing ending on our main verb, we have the continuous tense. When we change this to the past perfect continuous, we change has to had, and then we have Skylar had been picking roses for Jessica. Like I said, I know this can get a little bit complicated, takes a little bit of practice, and it definitely takes getting familiar with the terminology. This is some vocabulary practice to really master these concepts. One final note for participles, please remember our present participle is going to be the verb with the ing ending. Fortunately for all of us in English, this one is actually always going to follow the rule. And our past participle will be the verb plus the en ending or the ed ending or whatever else ending that verb in particular likes to have, because unfortunately lots of verbs like to break the rules here. All right, that concludes our presentation on the tenses of verbs. Thanks for watching.